Firebase Outpost Delta, Vietnam, March 1968. The bullet came from nowhere. One moment, Lieutenant Morrison was coordinating artillery support over the radio. The next, he was on the ground, a neat hole through his temple, his blood mixing with the red clay of Vietnam. The shot had come from at least 800 meters, beyond the effective range of every rifle in the firebase. Staff Sergeant James "Ghost" Patterson hit the dirt behind a sandbag wall, his M14 clutched tight against his chest. Around him, 2,000 Marines scrambled for cover as more shots cracked through the morning air. Precise, deliberate, impossible to return. "Sniper, northeast ridge!" someone screamed, but it didn't matter. The enemy was firing from a distance, where American rifles became glorified paperweights. The VC had upgraded their arsenal. Soviet SVD Dragunov rifles, accurate to 1,000 meters, outranging the Marines' M14s by 200 meters of deadly advantage. "Patterson!" Captain Brennan's voice cut through the chaos. "Get your ass to the observation post. I need eyes on those shooters." Ghost low-crawled through the firebase, feeling the familiar weight of dismissal in Brennan's tone. 3 years in country, 47 confirmed kills, and he was still Patterson, never sergeant, rarely acknowledged, constantly reminded that his expertise meant less because of the color of his skin. The observation post was a sandbagged position on the firebase perimeter with sightlines to the surrounding ridges. Private Martinez was already there, scope pressed to his eye, frustration carved into his young face. "I can see them, Sarge," Martinez said. 3 shooters, maybe 4, dug into the tree line at about 850 meters. They're taking turns. Systematic, professional. Ghost took the spotting scope and found them. Heat shimmer and muzzle flash from positions that would be suicide to assault and impossible to suppress with mortars in this terrain. The VC snipers had found the perfect range, close enough to devastate the firebase, far enough to be untouchable. "SVDs," Ghost said quietly. "Russian-made, Soviet-trained shooters. They're outranging us by design." "So what do we do?" "We die slowly," Ghost replied, "unless someone figures out how to make our rifles shoot farther." That afternoon, the body count reached 7. 7 Marines killed by an enemy they couldn't touch, couldn't fight, couldn't even threaten. The firebase was paralyzed. Supply runs became suicide missions. Patrol movements drew instant fire. Even command bunker positions weren't safe. Captain Brennan called a meeting in the operations center, his face gray with stress and sleeplessness. "Gentlemen, we have a problem. The VC have us in a kill box. Every time someone moves, they drop them. Air support can't see through the canopy. Artillery hits nothing but trees, and our rifles can't reach them. What about calling in Marine snipers with proper equipment?" Lieutenant Harris asked. "M40s. Better optics." "Nearest sniper team is at Da Nang. 3 days out if the weather holds. We don't have 3 days. At this rate, we'll lose 50 men before reinforcements arrive." Brennan looked around the room, his gaze skipping over Ghost like he was part of the furniture. "Ideas, gentlemen?" Ghost stayed silent. He'd learned that offering suggestions as a black NCO usually resulted in dismissal at best, mockery at worst. But his mind was already working the problem, turning over variables, calculating possibilities. The M14 was accurate to about 600 meters in perfect conditions. The SVD Dragunov worked reliably to 1,000. That 200-meter gap was the difference between life and death, between defending the firebase and watching it bleed out 1 Marine at a time. But what if the M14's limitation wasn't the rifle itself, but how it was being used? Ghost thought about barrel harmonics, about how vibration affected accuracy at distance. He thought about the improvised modifications he'd seen in his 3 years in country. Soldiers adapting, improvising, making standard-issue equipment perform beyond specifications because survival demanded it. And he thought about the fence wire they'd used last month to reinforce the perimeter. thick-gauge steel, flexible enough to work with, but rigid enough to hold tension. "Patterson, you got something to say, or you just gonna sit there?" Brennan's voice was sharp, impatient. Ghost met his eyes. "Sir, what if we could extend the M14's effective range? With what? Magic? We don't have better rifles, better scopes, or better ammunition. We have what we have, and what we have isn't enough." "What if it is enough, sir? What if the problem isn't the rifle, but the barrel harmonics at extended range?" Brennan stared at him like he'd started speaking Vietnamese. "Barrel harmonics? You want to lecture me about physics while Marines are dying?" "No, sir. I want to modify our rifles so they can shoot as far as the Dragunov. Give me 12 hours and 75 cents worth of wire." The silence that followed was heavy with disbelief. Lieutenant Harris actually laughed, a short, bitter sound. 75 cents? Patterson, this isn't a science project. This is war." "Exactly, sir. And in war, you use what works. The M14's barrel vibrates at extended range, throwing off accuracy. But if we can dampen that vibration with a tensioned wire system running along the barrel—" "A tensioned wire system," Brennan repeated slowly. "You want to wrap fence wire around rifles, and somehow that's going to let us outshoot Soviet equipment?" "Yes, sir. That's the stupidest thing I've heard all week, and I've heard a lot of stupid things." Brennan turned to the other officers. "Anyone else have actual ideas?" Ghost felt the familiar burn of dismissal, but he kept his voice level. "Sir, with respect, I've been shooting these rifles for 3 years. I know their limitations, and I know what affects accuracy at distance. This will work." "What you know," Brennan said coldly, "is how to follow orders, not how to redesign military equipment with garbage scavenged from a fence line. Dismissed, Sergeant." Ghost stood, saluted with mechanical precision, and left the operations center. Behind him, he heard Harris mutter something about ghetto engineering and the other officers laughing. The sound followed him across the firebase like tracer fire. Martinez was waiting outside, his face tight with anger he couldn't voice. "Sarge, that was—" "Nothing new," Ghost interrupted. "Come on, we've got work to do." "But the captain said I can't officially modify rifles. He didn't say I can't work on my own weapon." Ghost headed toward his quarters, his mind already calculating wire gauge, tension ratios, mounting points. "And if my rifle happens to perform better, and if other Marines happen to notice and want similar modifications, well, that's just soldiers being resourceful. That's disobeying a direct order. That's surviving," Ghost corrected. "There's a difference." His quarters were a sandbagged bunker he shared with 3 other Marines, none of whom spoke to him more than necessary. Ghost pulled out his M14, his maintenance kit, and the coil of fence wire he'd been using to repair his rack. The wire was perfect, 12-gauge steel, strong enough to handle tension but flexible enough to wrap. The theory was sound. At long range, the M14's barrel vibrated with each shot, the harmonics throwing off point of impact by several inches at 800 meters. But if he could dampen those vibrations with a carefully tensioned wire running parallel to the barrel, secured at strategic points to counteract the harmonic frequency. It was insane. It was desperate. It was exactly the kind of field modification that either revolutionized combat or got you killed trying. Ghost worked through the night, measuring, testing, adjusting. The wire had to be tight enough to affect barrel harmonics, but not so tight it warped the metal. The mounting points had to distribute tension evenly. The whole system had to withstand the heat and stress of sustained fire. By dawn, he had a prototype. His M14 now had a thin steel wire running along the top of the barrel, secured at 3 points with improvised clamps made from canteen clips. It looked ridiculous, like something a desperate soldier would jury-rig in the field, which was exactly what it was. Martinez appeared at his doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Sarge, you been up all night?" "Testing harmonics." Ghost took the coffee gratefully. Need to zero this thing, see if the modification actually works. A captain finds out you disobeyed him. Captain's gonna find out one way or another. Rather, he finds out after I've proven it works. Ghost checked his watch. Sun's up. VC snipers usually wait until there's activity before they start shooting. Gives us maybe an hour to test this before the daily murder show starts. They moved to the Firebase perimeter, to a position with clear sight lines to the ridgeline where the enemy's snipers operated. Ghost set up his modified M14 using sandbags to create a stable shooting platform. 800 meters to the tree line. Impossible range for a standard M14, but his rifle wasn't standard anymore. He chambered a round, settled into his shooting position, and found his breathing rhythm. The wire along his barrel caught morning light, looking absurd and desperate and possibly brilliant. Through his scope, he could see the tree line where VC snipers would soon begin their daily hunt. "Sarge," Martinez whispered, "you sure about this?" Ghost thought about Lieutenant Morrison with a hole through his head. About 7 Marines dead in 3 days. About 2,000 men trapped in a kill box because the enemy had better equipment and nobody wanted to listen to a black sergeant's crazy idea about fence wire and physics. "No," he admitted, "but we're doing it anyway." He pulled the trigger. The rifle cracked, the recoil familiar but different, smoother somehow, more controlled. Through the scope, he watched the bullet impact 800 meters downrange, hitting within 2 inches of his aim point. Martinez stared at the spotting scope, then at Ghost, then back at the scope. "Holy shit, Sarge! That's a 900-yard shot with an M14. That's impossible." "That's physics," Ghost corrected. "And that's how we're going to save this firebase." Firebase Outpost Delta, March 1968, Day 4. By noon, word had spread through the firebase like wildfire. Patterson's rifle could shoot farther than it should. Marines started appearing at his bunker, asking questions, wanting to see the modification, wondering if it really worked or if the morning test shot had been luck. Ghost demonstrated 3 more times, each shot at 800 meters, each one hitting within a 4-inch group. The wire system worked. Impossibly, ridiculously, it actually worked. "I want one," Martinez said immediately. "Whatever you did to your rifle, do it to mine." "Mine too," said Corporal Davis, a white Marine from Georgia who'd never spoken to Ghost before. "If that wire can make my M14 reach out and touch those VC bastards, I don't care if it looks stupid." Within 2 hours, Ghost had 6 Marines lined up for modifications. He worked quickly, measuring each rifle's barrel length, calculating tension requirements, installing the wire systems with the precision of someone who understood that lives depended on every adjustment being perfect. Captain Brennan found him on the 4th installation. "Patterson, what the hell do you think you're doing?" Ghost stood, came to attention. "Modifying rifles, sir. With permission, my own rifle demonstrated increased accuracy at extended range this morning. Other Marines requested similar modifications. I specifically told you not to—" Brennan stopped, his face cycling through anger, confusion, and something that might have been grudging respect. "Show me." They went to the perimeter. Ghost handed Brennan his modified M14, pointed to a target tree at 850 meters, and stepped back. Brennan was a good shot. 3 tours in Vietnam, plenty of combat experience. He'd know if the modification was real or wishful thinking. Brennan took 5 shots, 4 hit within 6 inches of point of aim. The 5th was a flyer, but still close enough to be lethal at that distance. "Son of a bitch," Brennan said quietly. "You actually did it. You made an M14 shoot like a goddamn sniper rifle. Just dampened the barrel harmonics, sir. Basic physics." "Basic physics with 75 cents of fence wire." Brennan lowered the rifle, studying the modification like it was some kind of alien artifact. "How many rifles can you modify by sunset?" "Depends on how many shooters you want ready, sir. Each installation takes about 40 minutes. Call it 10 rifles if I work straight through." "Make it 20. Pull anyone you need to help." Show them the installation process. I want every designated marksman in this firebase carrying a modified rifle by tomorrow morning." Brennan met Ghost's eyes, and for the first time, there was something other than dismissal there. "And Patterson, if this works, if we can actually fight back against those Dragunov shooters, I'll make sure your name goes in the after-action report. Just want to keep Marines alive, sir. Then keep working." Ghost assembled a team of 4 Marines and began mass-producing the modification. The work was tedious, precise, and absolutely critical. Each wire had to be tensioned correctly, each mounting point had to be secure, each rifle had to be test-fired to verify the modification worked. By sunset, they'd completed 18 rifles. By midnight, 23. The VC snipers struck at dawn, 3 shots in quick succession that would normally have sent Marines diving for cover. But this time, Ghost was ready. He was positioned on the eastern perimeter with his modified M14, scope zeroed for 850 meters, watching the ridgeline where muzzle flash had just appeared. There, a heat shimmer, a slight movement in the foliage, the enemy sniper adjusting for his next shot. Ghost settled into his breathing, feeling the rifle settle against his shoulder. The wire along his barrel caught morning light, looking absurd and desperate and absolutely perfect. Through his scope, he could see the VC sniper's position clearly, too far for a standard M14, well within range of a Dragunov, and now finally within reach of his modified weapon. He exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked. 860 meters away, the VC sniper's body jerked and fell from his concealed position, tumbling down the ridge in a cascade of disturbed foliage. The firebase went silent. Every Marine who'd seen the shot stared at Ghost, at his ridiculous wire-wrapped rifle, at the impossible distance where an enemy sniper had just died. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered. "He actually got him." Martinez was on the spotting scope. "Confirmed kill, Sarge. Center mass shot at..." He checked his range card. 863 meters. That's farther than an M14 should shoot. "It's exactly as far as an M14 should shoot," Ghost corrected, "if you fix the harmonics problem." 2 more VC snipers opened fire from different positions, trying to suppress the Americans who'd just demonstrated they could shoot back. But now Ghost wasn't alone. Davis was on the southern perimeter with his modified rifle. Jenkins had the western approach covered. Martinez was setting up on the north side. 23 modified M14s, all capable of reaching out to 900 meters, all operated by Marines who were done being hunted like animals. The counter-sniper battle that followed was surgical and brutal. Every time a VC sniper fired and revealed his position, a modified M14 answered. The Dragunov's range advantage disappeared. The tactical superiority evaporated. Within 2 hours, the enemy snipers either withdrew or died, trying to hold positions that were no longer safe. By noon, the siege was broken. For the first time in 4 days, Marines could move through the firebase without fear of instant death. Supply runs resumed. Patrols went out. The base came back to life, all because of 75 cents worth of fence wire and one sergeant's understanding of physics that nobody wanted to hear. Captain Brennan found Ghost in the armory, installing wire systems on 6 more rifles for incoming replacements. "Patterson, I need a full technical write-up of your modification. Command wants to know how we suddenly gained 200 meters of effective range." "It's just wire and tension, sir. Nothing revolutionary." "It's revolutionary enough that we went from losing 7 Marines a day to 0 casualties in 12 hours. Brennan paused, and something in his expression shifted. "I was wrong about dismissing your idea, about assuming you were just talking out of your ass because you're black, sir." The word hung in the air between them, heavy and unavoidable. "Yeah," Brennan said quietly, "because you're black. And I'm sorry, that was stupid. You just saved 2,000 lives with an idea I laughed at because I was too busy being a bigot to listen." Ghost kept working on the rifle in front of him, tightening wire, checking tension. "Apology noted, sir. But with respect, I don't need your apology. I need this modification distributed to every firebase in Vietnam before more Marines die because they are outgunned. Already in progress. Division wants you on a helicopter to Da Nang tomorrow to brief the brass. They're talking about field testing this across the entire theater." Brennan watched Ghost work, seeing him clearly for maybe the first time. "For what it's worth, Patterson, you're the best damn NCO I've ever served with, and I should have said that 3 years ago." "You're saying it now, sir. That counts for something." But as Brennan left, Ghost felt the weight of every ignored suggestion, every dismissed idea, every moment when his expertise had been valued less because of his skin color. The wire modification worked. Lives were saved. But how many Marines had died in the years before because someone like him wasn't listened to? How much innovation had been lost because talent came in the wrong color packaging? The questions had no good answers. Only the grim mathematics of war and prejudice, calculated in body counts and missed opportunities. Martinez appeared with a fresh coil of wire. "Sarge, we got 15 more rifles to modify. Word is spreading. Every unit in the sector wants this upgrade." "Then we better get to work," Ghost said. "War doesn't pause for anyone." They worked through the afternoon and into the night, transforming standard M14s into precision instruments that could finally match the Soviet equipment. Each modification was a small victory, a proof that ingenuity mattered more than equipment superiority, that a black sergeant from Detroit could see solutions that officers with academy degrees missed. 75 cents of wire. That's all it took to change the tactical balance of an entire region. Not millions in research and development, not advanced technology shipped from the States, just wire, physics, and the willingness to try something ridiculous because lives depended on it. Outside, the night was quiet. No sniper fire, no screams, no bodies being carried to the medical tent. Just the sound of Marines breathing easier, moving freely, living through another day, because someone had refused to accept that being outgunned meant being defeated. Ghost finished the last rifle as dawn broke. 23 had become 47. By tomorrow it would be over 100. The modification would spread through Vietnam like wildfire, transforming every firebase, every patrol, every Marine who'd felt helpless against enemy snipers with superior range. And somewhere in the Pentagon, some officer would probably take credit for it, would write about tactical innovation and field modifications without ever mentioning the black sergeant who'd invented it while being told his idea was stupid. That was how the army worked, how the world worked. Credit flowed upward to the white officers, while the actual work got done by the people nobody wanted to listen to. But Ghost didn't care about credit. He cared that Marines were alive who would have been dead. That was enough. That had to be enough. Because in war, survival was the only victory that mattered. And today, 2,000 Marines had survived because he'd refused to shut up and accept the unacceptable. The sun rose over Firebase Outpost Delta, and for the first time in days, it rose on a base that wasn't dying. Aqui está o roteiro dividido em 2 blocos. Bloco 1, Da Nang Air Base, Vietnam, March 1968, Day 7. The briefing room was packed with officers, majors, colonels, even a 1-star general. Ghost stood at the front with his modified M14, feeling every eye on him, measuring him, judging whether a black sergeant really had something worth their time, or if this was just another field expedient that wouldn't scale. "Gentlemen," General Hartwick began, "Sergeant Patterson has developed a field modification that appears to extend M14 effective range by approximately 300 meters. Firebase Delta reports 0 sniper casualties in 72 hours after implementation. That's significant enough to warrant this briefing." Ghost stepped forward, holding his rifle. "Sirs, the modification addresses barrel harmonics at extended range. Standard M14 barrels vibrate during firing, causing accuracy degradation beyond 600 meters. By installing a tensioned wire system, how much does it cost? A colonel interrupted. Per rifle? 75 cents, sir. 12-gauge steel wire, available at any hardware store or from perimeter fencing. The room went silent. Officers exchanged glances. Someone coughed. 75 cents, the colonel repeated. And you're telling me this matches Soviet sniper rifle performance? In practical terms, yes, sir. The Dragunov's advantage was range. This modification eliminates that advantage. Demonstrate, General Hartwick ordered. They moved to the firing range. Ghost set up at the 800-meter line, a distance where M14s typically grouped 18 to 24 inches. He fired 5 rounds, smooth and methodical, letting the rifle settle between shots. The target officer called the results. 5 rounds, 8-inch group at 800 meters. That's... He checked his notes, disbelief in his voice. That's better than our designated marksman rifles. Better than anything we've seen from standard M14 configuration. Holy hell, someone muttered. General Hartwick picked up Ghost's rifle, examining the wire system like it was an artifact from another planet. Sergeant, why hasn't this been standard issue? Why hasn't Army R&D developed this? Ghost chose his words carefully. Can't speak to R&D, sir. I just know Marines were dying because we were outranged. Had to find a solution with what was available. And nobody listened to you when you proposed it? No, sir, not initially. Hartwick's expression hardened, because they thought a field modification from an NCO, from a black NCO, couldn't possibly be legitimate. Is that about right? Sir, I'd rather focus on implementing the solution than analyzing why it took so long to be heard. Diplomatic answer, Sergeant, but we both know the truth. Hartwick set down the rifle. Here's what's going to happen. This modification becomes standard protocol for all M14 equipped units in Vietnam, effective immediately. Designation, Ghost Protocol, after Sergeant Patterson's call sign. I want technical manuals written, training programs established, and supply chains set up to distribute wire to every Firebase in country. General, a major objected, with respect, we can't base doctrine on a field modification developed by one of the best damn marksmen in this theater. Hartwick's voice could have cut steel. Major, I don't care if this modification was developed by a private who flunked out of basic. It works. It saves lives. That's the only criteria that matters in a war zone. Ghost felt something shift in the room. Not acceptance exactly, but acknowledgement. The modification was too effective to ignore, even if it came from someone they'd rather dismiss. Sergeant Patterson, Hartwick continued, you're being temporarily assigned to my staff. Your job is to travel to every major firebase in I Corps and 3 Corps, install these modifications, and train armorers to replicate them. You'll have whatever resources you need and authorization to override any officer who objects. Questions? No, sir. Good, because as of this morning, intelligence reports that the NVA is deploying more Dragunov rifles across the theater. They think they've found a tactical advantage. Let's prove them wrong with 75 cents of American ingenuity. Over the next 3 weeks, Ghost became a traveling armorer, moving from firebase to firebase with boxes of wire and a mission that felt surreal. He was the same sergeant who'd been ignored and dismissed a month ago. Now he had a General S authorization and orders to implement his stupid idea across an entire combat theater. Firebase Alpha, 63 rifles modified, 7 VC snipers killed in the first week. Firebase Bravo, 81 rifles. The enemy sniper threat collapsed within days. Firebase Charlie, 94 rifles. Marines started calling them ghost guns after his call sign. At each location, Ghost encountered the same pattern: skepticism from officers, enthusiasm from enlisted men who'd been dying to enemy fire, and grudging acceptance when the modification proved itself in combat. Some officers thanked him. Others made it clear they resented taking advice from a black NCO, even one with a general's backing. "Sarge, why do you put up with it?" Martinez asked one night at Firebase Echo. He'd volunteered to travel with Ghost, helping with installations. The disrespect, the racism, the officers who act like you're invisible even while you're saving their Marines. Ghost tightened a wire on another M14, checking tension with practiced precision. "Because Marines are dying, Martinez, and if I let my pride get in the way of keeping them alive, then I'm no better than the officers who let their prejudice get in the way of listening to solutions. That's not fair, Sarge. You shouldn't have to be twice as good just to be heard." "No, I shouldn't, but that's the world we live in. So I'll be 3 times as good if that's what it takes." Ghost held up the finished rifle. "Besides, every Marine carrying one of these rifles is proof that talent doesn't care about skin color. Eventually, even the racist bastards have to acknowledge that." "You really believe that?" Ghost thought about Captain Brennan's apology, about General Hartwick cutting through bureaucracy to implement the modification, about the Marines, black, white, Latino, every shade and background, who'd trusted his expertise enough to carry modified rifles into combat. "I believe change happens slowly," he said, "but it happens, and every life we save is a step in the right direction." By mid-April, over 1,500 M14s had been modified. The tactical landscape shifted dramatically. VC and NVA snipers who'd operated with impunity suddenly faced return fire at ranges they'd thought were safe. The Dragunov's advantage evaporated. American casualties from sniper fire dropped by 73% across the modified units. Soviet advisors noticed. Intelligence intercepted communications discussing the American wire modification and recommending counter-tactics. The modification had become significant enough that the enemy was adapting their doctrine around it. "That's when you know you've won," General Hartwick told Ghost during a debriefing at Division HQ. "When the enemy changes their behavior because of something you did. They're not just fighting you anymore, they're afraid of you." "Just trying to keep Marines alive, sir." "You've done more than that, Sergeant. You've proven that innovation doesn't come from laboratories and think tanks. It comes from soldiers in the field who refuse to accept limitations." Hartwick paused. "I'm recommending you for the Bronze Star. Your modification has saved countless lives and changed how we fight this war." "Sir, I appreciate that, but you'd rather not have the attention." "Too late, Sergeant. You're going to be in training manuals. Your modification is going to be taught at sniper schools. And yes, you're going to get a medal, because that's how we recognize excellence in this man's army." Ghost accepted the recognition, but it felt hollow somehow. The real victory was the silence, the absence of sniper fire, the Marines walking safely through firebases, the casualty reports showing zeros instead of body counts. That mattered more than any medal. Still, when the Bronze Star ceremony happened at Division HQ, with General Hartwick pinning the medal on his chest while photographers documented the moment, Ghost felt something shift. Not just for him, but for every black soldier watching, every Marine who'd been told their ideas didn't matter because of their rank or race or background. "This could have been developed years ago," Hartwick said during his speech. "Could have saved thousands of lives if we'd been willing to listen to innovative thinking regardless of where it came from. Let Sergeant Patterson's achievement remind us that talent and genius exist everywhere, and our job as leaders is to recognize it, not suppress it because it doesn't come in the package we expect." The words were nice. The reality was slower. Ghost still encountered officers who treated him as less than, who resented his recognition, who made it clear that one Bronze Star didn't erase the color of his skin. But he also met young black Marines who looked at him differently now, like proof that excellence could be acknowledged, that contributions could matter, that maybe the system could change. Detroit, Michigan, 1991. The high school auditorium was packed with students, most of them black kids from neighborhoods where military service was often the best path to opportunity. James Patterson stood at the podium, his Bronze Star visible on his suit jacket. his grey hair and weathered face marking him as someone who'd seen things these kids could barely imagine. "You've all heard the story," he began, "about the wire modification, the Ghost Protocol, the lives saved in Vietnam. But what you might not know is why it mattered beyond the tactical results." He held up a piece of 12-gauge wire, identical to what he'd used 23 years ago. This wire cost 75 cents. It was lying around as fence material, considered garbage, worthless. But when applied correctly, with understanding of physics and barrel harmonics, it transformed a standard rifle into a precision instrument, changed the balance of power, saved 2,000 lives. A student raised her hand. "Sir, were you scared when the officers didn't believe you?" "Terrified," Ghost admitted. "Not of combat. I'd been in firefights for 3 years. I was scared that Marines would keep dying because I couldn't convince people to listen. Scared that prejudice would be stronger than proof. Scared that being right wouldn't matter if I was the wrong color to be heard. But you convinced them eventually." "I didn't convince them with words. I convinced them with results, modified my own rifle, proved it worked, and forced them to acknowledge reality." Ghost paused, looking at the young faces staring at him. "And here's what I learned. You will encounter people who dismiss you because of your race, your background, your circumstances. They'll look at you and see someone who can't possibly have valuable ideas, and you have 3 choices." He held up one finger. "1, accept their judgment. Decide they're right. You don't have anything to contribute and give up. That's the easy path. It's also the one that guarantees failure. 2 fingers. 2, get angry. Fight them. Rage against the injustice. Spend all your energy battling prejudice instead of solving problems. That's tempting. It's also exhausting and ultimately unproductive. 3 fingers. 3. Be so undeniably excellent that they have no choice but to acknowledge you. Work twice as hard. Be 3 times as good. Prove your value so completely that even the bigots have to admit you're right." A young man in the back called out, "That's not fair. Why should we have to work harder just because of our skin color?" "You're absolutely right," Ghost said. "It's not fair. It's unjust, it's wrong, and it shouldn't be this way. But here's the reality. You can spend your life fighting against the unfairness, or you can spend your life being so good that you change the system from within. I chose the second path. Every life I saved was proof that talent doesn't have a color. Every Marine carrying a modified rifle was evidence that excellence comes from unexpected places." "Did it get easier?" the girl asked, "after they recognized you?" "No," Ghost said honestly. "Recognition doesn't erase prejudice. I still encountered racism, still dealt with officers who resented me, still had to prove myself over and over. But each time I proved myself, it got a little easier for the next person. Each barrier I broke made it simpler for other black soldiers to be heard." He set down the wire, letting it catch the auditorium lights. "This piece of wire represents something bigger than tactical innovation. It represents the principle that solutions can come from anywhere, that genius doesn't announce itself with credentials and degrees, and that sometimes the most important ideas come from people who've been told they don't matter." "So, what do you want us to remember?" a student asked. Ghost thought about Lieutenant Morrison dying from a shot he couldn't return, about Captain Brennan's grudging apology, about General Hartwick cutting through bureaucracy to implement a modification from a sergeant nobody wanted to hear, about 2,000 Marines who lived because he'd refused to shut up when told his idea was stupid. "Remember that your background doesn't determine your potential," he said. "Remember that innovation often comes from desperation and necessity, not laboratories and think tanks. Remember that being dismissed isn't the same as being wrong. And remember that one person with a good idea and the courage to implement it can change the course of history." "Even if that person is black?" someone asked. "Especially if that person is black," Ghost replied. Because we've been told for so long that we can't innovate, can't contribute, can't compete intellectually. Every time one of us proves that wrong, we break down walls for everyone who comes after. After the assembly, students lined up to ask questions, to see the bronze star, to touch the piece of wire that had saved so many lives. Ghost answered patiently, knowing that for some of these kids, this would be the moment they decided their circumstances didn't define their limits. An elderly white man waited until the students dispersed. He approached slowly, using a cane, his eyes wet with emotion. "Sergeant Patterson, I'm Michael Davis. I carried one of your modified rifles at Firebase Delta, March 1968. Ghost recognized him immediately, older now, weathered by decades, but the same Marine who'd been the second to request a wire modification. "Corporal Davis, good to see you made it home." "Because of you," Davis said quietly. "The VC sniper who would have killed me couldn't reach me after you modified my rifle. I got married, had 3 kids, lived a life I wouldn't have had if you'd listened when they called your idea stupid." His voice broke. "I never got to thank you. So, thank you, Sergeant. Thank you for being stubborn enough to save my life." They shook hands, and Ghost felt the weight of every decision, every modification, every moment he'd refused to accept being dismissed. This was the real victory. Not medals or recognition, but the lives lived, the children raised, the futures that existed because he'd wrapped wire around rifle barrels and refused to let prejudice determine who lived and died. "You don't have to thank me," Ghost said. "You just have to pass it on. Teach your kids that innovation comes from everywhere. That talent doesn't have a color, that solutions are often found by people nobody expects to be brilliant." Davis nodded, tears streaming down his face. "My daughter's graduating MIT next year, engineering degree, first in our family to go to college. I told her about you, about the wire modification, about how the smartest solution came from someone with no formal training, just practical knowledge and willingness to try." He paused. "She says when she makes her first big innovation, she's going to call it the Patterson Protocol, in your honor." Ghost felt his own eyes burning. "Tell her to call it the Impossible Protocol, because that's what they'll say it is, right until the moment she proves them wrong." The old Marine left, and Ghost stood alone in the empty auditorium, holding a piece of wire that cost 75 cents and changed military doctrine. The modification had spread beyond Vietnam. It was taught in sniper schools now, adapted for different rifles and calibers, a permanent part of how marksmen thought about long-range accuracy. But the real legacy wasn't tactical. It was the proof that genius existed outside expected channels, that a black sergeant from Detroit could see solutions that officers with academy degrees missed, that 75 cents of wire and understanding of physics could outperform Soviet engineering and overcome institutional prejudice simultaneously. 23 years later, the lesson remained. Don't let anyone tell you your ideas don't matter because of where you come from. Be excellent. Be undeniable. Be so good they have no choice but to listen. And when they finally do, use that platform to lift up everyone who comes after you. Ghost walked out of the auditorium into Detroit sunlight, carrying his piece of wire, his bronze star, and the knowledge that somewhere in America, a young black engineer was going to revolutionize something because she'd heard his story and decided that being dismissed wasn't the same as being wrong. The war was over. The battles remained. But every victory, every life saved, every barrier broken, every young person inspired was proof that change happened one wire modification at a time, one refused dismissal at a time, one moment of stubborn excellence at a time. And in the end, that was enough.